So one of the things we wanted to show folks as part of this conference was some of the new features in 3.1 that are both admin console related, but also give you a bit of a feel for some of the features sort of independent of that. Just overall developer productivity. So I'm going to go ahead and show you a cool feature we call statement and connection leak detection. And I'm going to use the Eclipse environment. And specifically, this is the Oracle Enterprise Pack For Eclipse environment, which includes all the GlassFish plugins as well as WebLogic plugins. So it's a nice distribution. It also includes all the Java Enterprise Edition tooling as well for Eclipse. So just to give you a sense, if you click on the About Eclipse platform, one way you can tell this is an Oracle Enterprise Pack For Eclipse product is you'll see that it's the Oracle icon is there as well. And you'll see the Eclipse Web Tools platform, the WTP, which I'll be referring to quite a bit. And I've also installed the Sonatype M2 Maven plugin because I'm a big Maven fan myself. And this is all based off on the Helios distribution of the Eclipse 3.6.2 platform. And I'll show you some stuff in one of our great IDEs, the Netbeans as well, which has some great Maven support a little bit later. So the first thing I'm going to do is I've actually already created a project. In the interest of time, so you don't have to watch me type, I'm going to go ahead and click the Import button here. And I'm going to import my existing Maven project by clicking on the Maven subtab, existing Maven project. This is part of the Sonatype M2 plugin. Click Next. And then you just type in the directory, or you can browse to it, to the location of your Pom file. I'm just going to do users left projects. Leak detection is the name of the directory I created. And hit return, and it located the Pom XML file. And it has the group artifact ID there. So I'm going to go ahead and click Finish. And it's actually going to go and import my project there. Okay, it looks like the project went ahead and built. So let's take a quick look. I'm just going to click on the node here, and you'll see, if you're not familiar with the WTP project structure, you'll see that it has a set of Java resources, and it uses the standard Maven convention when I created the archetype here, or the project from the archetype. You have a source Java, and in there I have a data source helper class. And it's pretty straightforward. It's a singleton. I have a static final instance being statically initialized, and here I'm just looking up via JNDI the JDBC underscore default data source that's part of the default domain that gets created. And it looks like I just have a JSP as well under the web content. Let's take a look here. And looks like my JSP is going to load. And what am I doing? It's pretty straightforward. I'm effectively just going to use the data source helper to look up a JDBC connection and throw an exception if I can't get one. And this is effectively going to create a leaked connection because I'm not closing the connection. And now those of you who've been developing Java EE or JDBC code are pretty familiar with this, have probably seen this problem in the past where folks inadvertently create programmatic connection leaks, or even more common is the statement handle leaks, where you forget to close Java SQL statement objects. Especially doing that in finally clauses. You always want to make sure that you do that in a finally clause. Otherwise, you can have slowly leak handles or statement references during exception conditions. Okay. Now, one of the neat things that comes with OPI is our WTP plugin. So I'm going to go ahead and switch over to the Java EE perspective, and you'll see this in Eclipse when the perspective changes, you get quite a different view, look, and feel of the IDE, which is quite nice. It's a nice feature. Now you'll see a new tab at the bottom here, and it's the Servers tab. And you'll see an empty pane because I haven't created a new server for this, or created a server for this workspace yet. So I'm going to right click on the empty pane and you'll see a new server context menu pop up. I'm going to go ahead and select that, and you're going to see the GlassFish node down here. And under GlassFish, you'll see I'm going to select the GlassFish Server Open Source Edition. And I'm going to go ahead and take the default localhost, and the name is arbitrary, so I'll just leave it for the default here. And then it's going to ask for the install directory. I'm going to actually just type it in the interest of time here. You can browse to it if you like. Whoops, products, GlassFish v31. Now, one thing to remember is you have to put the subdirectory underneath. So go ahead and click next. And I'm going to take the default domain that's created when you use the typical installation, which is domain 1. I'm going to go ahead and select next. And you'll see that the WTP automatically, the plugin here detected I had a dynamic war project and named leak detection as the context path. And I'm going to go ahead and deploy that to this server and this domain set. So I'm going to click finish. And now you'll see I can click on the node in the servers tab. We can go ahead and have the server is started and it's publishing and synchronizing my application binaries right now. Okay, pretty cool. I mean, that's about as easy as it gets in order to publish an application. Now, some other neat things, when you right-click, you'll get a context-sensitive menu on GlassFish Server. You can actually go down to the GlassFish node here, and you'll see that you can view the admin console and launch it directly from within Eclipse using the built-in Eclipse web browser. And now, if you remember from my simple application here where I have the data source helper is looking at the default JDBC connection. So let's go into the console and enable leak detection. You'll see the JDBC resource, which contains all our JNDI names. I was using the default, which you can see here relies on the Derby pool. And statement and connection leak detection is set on the connection pool itself. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the connection pool, and I'm going to kind of blow this up so we can get a better view of it. And maximize the window. Now here's the settings. Now these are the initial basic environment settings that you get for a connection pool, like min, max, pool resize, and timeouts, which is all very useful information. Now under the advanced setting, you'll see where the leak detection is enabled. Now I've already set up leak detection, and you can tell because I've set the value here for leak timeout to 2 seconds. Now what that's going to do is it's going to check to see within a 2-second interval if any of the connections have been leaked. So when the connection is allocated within n seconds, where n is the value you input here, the connection should be returned to the pool. Otherwise, it's going to be considered leaked. Now, I can also enable leak reclaim. Leak reclaim, if I check this box here, once the connection timeout has occurred, the actual the actual connection will be reclaimed. And we also provide this feature for statement handles as well. And that would be set on using the additional properties tab here. You can add additional properties there as well. You can see this also contains a basic connection that I'm going to use for the default server. Now you see here I got an error, and the reason why is I actually have not started the database running. So let's go ahead and do that. And we're going to start the Derby database by going into, from the command line. It's the easiest way to do it. So I'm going to just go into my bin and run asadmin start database. Okay. Now what this is going to do is it's going to bring up Derby, the JavaDB in network mode on port 1527. And now I should have my Derby pool, and I'm going to go ahead and run a ping. And sure enough, the connection is now working. Now let's go back to the advanced tab and see, sure enough, my leak detection is enabled. Okay, cool. Now let's actually see this in action. I'm going to switch this over to port. Oh, let me show you one other feature while I do this. Under the Applications tab, this is a nice feature in the console. see that it's already deployed my leak detection application. So if you go ahead and click on the launch button, what it'll do is it'll give you a list of the links to the context path and the port for which the server is deployed. And you click right there and it'll immediately launch the browser. It's kind of a nice feature if you can't remember the context path for the application. You can see here I'm just going to execute this JSP a couple times. Then I'm going to go back to the console, which is another nice feature here. I'm going to close the browser and minimize this window. Now, right from within the plugin, I can go to the GlassFish menu and say View Admin Console. Oops, sorry, wrong button. Sorry, View Log File. And this is going to take me immediately to the log file. Now, when you enable the leak detection and you're not enabling the leak reclaim, what the behavior is what you see here. You get a log message warning that you have a potential leak and it's been detected and it tells you which connection pool, and then it gives you the full stack trace from where the connection was allocated. So now if you go back, you can see it came from my JSP, the generated Java servlet from that JSP, which is line 61, and that method is calling get connection on line 16 for my data source helper. And so this is a nice way of just quickly locating the allocation points for potential leaked resources. Now, sometimes you may not be sure if a leak's actually occurred, or you just have a long-running transaction or a long-running query that's basically allocated the connection and left that connection pinned. Okay, so that's a pretty neat feature that you can enable using the GlassFish console and the Eclipse integration we have with Oracle Enterprise Pack for Eclipse and the GlassFish plugin there. Okay. So now let's go ahead and I'm going to show you some additional features that are pretty neat in terms of developer productivity. Let's go ahead and switch over to our Netbeans environment. First, I'm going to go ahead and shut down my server here. And we'll go ahead and stop the Derby database by issuing ASMadmin stop database. Okay. So, okay, so now let's exit out of Eclipse and launch Netbeans. And I'm going to show you, while Netbeans is coming up, I'm going to show you a feature sort of using the Julia Childs-based approach of, sort of having some pre-canned stuff so folks don't have to suffer watching me type. But anyway, what I'm going to show you is some of the cool features part of Java E6 and what we provide inside of GlassFish that let you basically build some tests using the embedded EJB container, and you can run those tests just like you would run all kinds of JUnit tests. Before I get started, I've already created a Maven project structure, so I'll do a quick overview of the project structure. I have sort of an enterprise application parent, Pom. And inside the parent Pom, you can see, I'm going to go ahead and open this up. I've provided the plugin repository for GlassFish, which is download.java.net maven/GlassFish, and also the Eclipse Link repo because we're going to be using Eclipse Link. And I have a couple of children modules, or child modules, that are part of my application. And I have Build Tracker, EJB, Web, and Ear. So I'm going to go ahead and launch the EJB since we're going to primarily focus on some of the embedded EJB container support. And a quick look at the Pom. Here you'll see it's a pretty straightforward Pom. There's, if you create the basic EJB Pom, one of the things you'll see is using the standard EJB archetype you'll see a Pom that looks pretty similar to this. There's nothing all that special about it. The Maven EJB plugin for that version. And note, I'm using EJB 3.1 here. Okay, so now let's start with a domain model. So one of the first things you do, at least I like to do, is come up with a domain model, and I'm going to just sort of steal, using my Julia Childs pre-baked approach, I'm going to come up with for my bill tracking application, the notion of a service bill, because we're going to primarily be dealing with service bills. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new Java class from that. We're going to call that service bill. And I'm going to copy and paste over this, so it's mostly just so we get the file name correct. Okay. And I'm going to just go into code here and copy this over and paste it in there, and then let's walk through this guy. Okay. So, a couple things about my service bill here. One, let's see, we're going to have a POJO. We're going to need to generate an ID. So we'll just use a standard ID, and we'll use the generated value for that. We have a provider name, date of service, description of service, and a due date when the bill is actually due. So it's a fairly simple domain model. We're going to annotate it with a standard JPA entity, and I've already generated a bunch of getters for it. And then some pretty simple business logic to test whether or not our bill is late. We just check if the due date's after the current date. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. Now note I'm missing a bunch of imports. So now let's get a little closer down to business. We're not quite yet ready to compile. First, we're going to add our EJB facade here. So let's go ahead and use my Julia Childs-based approach here, and I'm going to create my billing persistence service, and I'm going to put that inside the model project. Obviously, that's probably not the right one, but a little sloppy perhaps, but it's okay. Okay. And what did I call that again? It is billing persistence service. You can always tell when you've got a good name when you can remember it off the top of your head. Anyway, okay, so I'm going to copy and this is boilerplate kind of in JPA code here. Again, you're going to see a couple pretty standard things. We're going to inject a billing persistence unit, and that's going to have a persistence context that we're going to inject the entity manager. And we have a add bill and remove bill method, which takes in the case of the service bill, a bill instance, and in the case of the remove bill, just the primary key ID so we can read it in through the entity manager in the case of detached NAG managers. Okay. Now, often you're going to need a test case, so one of the first things folks do is you'd like to be able to create a test case. So let's go ahead and do that, and this time we're going to call it, using my Julia Childs-based approach here. Whoops, what did I call this file? I'll just go ahead and open it. Service bill test case. Okay. Okay, and this is going in our test packages. So I'm going to go ahead and paste some methods in here, and let's take a look. So there's some neat new things here. Now note, one of the things we're going to do, first let's get our stuff to compile. So I'm going to just go ahead and add the proper dependencies, and I'm going to kind of cheat here because I have these all pre-baked, whoops, using my XML editor. And let me go ahead and open my EJB Pom. And so let's add a couple of dependencies here. The ones that we're going to use Eclipse link. So let's go ahead and drop that dependency in there. All right, go back to my Pom. Okay, under my dependencies, let's add that Eclipse link there. And let's add Java E6, which I think is most of our dependencies there. Okay. Now Java E6, of course, is going to include the JavaX persistence APIs as well as the EJB API. So we'll drop this dependency in there, and I think we should start getting stuff. Okay, so let's continue to add the rest of our dependencies here. Okay, so let's go back. Let's see, I bet you we have our service bill is now compiling, persistent service, and then of course we're going to need to enable a few things on the service bill test case. Note we're missing the EJB container from the embeddable API. So now let's add the final step to the Pom to enable the test here, and what we're going to do is bring in the dependencies from our parent Pom here, and have that in this square. So the first thing I need to drag over is going to be this some of these properties, and this is just the way I like to refer to the actual embedded APIs, jars themselves. through properties. Now, typically you'll have these set in your Maven settings. Actually, this is an old version, so let me just change that. I think that should work fine. And this is just referring to the runtime for the static embedded shell jar. Then I'm going to bring over the actual dependency here, which is referenced via system path, but it could easily be coming in over the Maven repo on java.net as well. This is just the way I built it out, and I'll go ahead and save that. And then I bet you, actually, I'm going to change this build to 3.1 here. Oops, actually, I think that will be fine. I think it's a newer version. No, maybe not. Let me actually change that back here. Whoops. So I go back to build 41 actually. Okay. Now, I suspect what will happen, the Maven will eventually resolve once it does its incremental compile. It'll actually resolve back to the Pom here. So let me go back to the EJB Pom and see what else we're going to add. So now I have the dependency for, whoops, I didn't close this out. That's why it's still complaining. So I'm going to add the dependency down here to close that element. And then I'm going to add the open element here. Okay, there we go. Now if we click back on the service build test case, it'll eventually resolve. And voila, there we go. So now we have all the dependencies sort of wired into our service build test case. Okay, now let's walk through the actual test case here and do a bit of cleanup. This is sort of the old school way of using JUnit. I'm using the setup method, but I could easily use the annotations, and indeed it's telling me I should be using the override annotation because I'm overriding the superclass for setup. Now note here I'm going to create a new properties object, a hash map of string objects. And one of the things I'm going to put in there is actually the application name, and this is the one required property for the embedded EJB container in GlassFish. And then I'm going to call the create EJB container. Now this method, of course, if you're not familiar with JUnit, is going to be invoked, the setup method is going to be invoked before it actually runs any of my test cases. And I've created 2 test cases here. They're fairly straightforward. I'm simply instantiating a new domain object, my service build, setting the properties of that, and then testing my assert, doing some assertions to guarantee that the stuff actually was written to the database, as well as asserting that my business logic, whether or not your bill is late, is actually correct. And then I have a second method which goes about removing the bill as well. A couple of really cool things here I'd like to show you. One is I'm going to look at my persistence service using these new global Jindy references. And this method here is a simple helper. Now if I were building a large test suite, I would use this as a way of looking up the EJBs probably in a superclass, and then using this helper method all over my EJB test cases. And then when each test gets torn down, I'm actually going to shut down the underlying container. Okay. Now, before we get too far, let's go drill into, before we actually, I guess, run our test case here, let's go look at some of the other elements of the project. For example, let's take a look at the actual persistence unit itself. So under resources, there should be a meta-inf directory, and I've already created a persistence XML here. I'm just going to go ahead and open that file. There we go. You'll see in here I have a billing persistence unit, and it's going to use the Eclipse Linux JPA 2.0. I'm going to actually have the tables created and dropped, and I'm going to use an automatic validation strategy. And the shared cache mode I'm not going to worry about since we're mostly running test cases here. But and I've left the data source undefined. And the reason I did that is it's going to use the default data source that's part of the domain. Domain 1 when we actually create it, and this data source will be sort of auto-created. But before I do that, what I want to do, and is mentioned that these two properties, which you can use in the designer or through your favorite text editors, to have the actual DDL generate, and you'll see the eclipselink.ddl-generation property and the value set to drop and create the tables. And so the first time the persistence unit is instantiated, it's going to go ahead and drop any existing tables and create them from scratch for you. And this will allow us to consistently and repeatedly run our test cases because the DDL is going to get created for us. So before I run the test case, I'm going to actually go into the Services tab in Netbeans. You'll see here that there's a databases node, and or databases tree rather. And then underneath one of the nodes, I'm actually going to start JavaDB so that when GlassFish bootstraps, it'll connect up. The embedded GlassFish runtime connects up to Derby as it's running, and we'll have a database all set to go. Okay, so now I'm going to just switch back, and I think we're going to ready to give it a shot and actually run our test case. So let's try and run it. I'll show you a couple of different ways. We're going to try and run it from the command line through Maven, because we've been working through Maven, and we could also run it directly in Netbeans. But let's try from Maven. This is my GlassFish home, so I'm going to just create a new shell here. We're going to go into our project, and it is in Projects, Build Tracker. And I believe we have the Build Tracker EJB subproject. And in there, I'm going to just run mvn clean, and how about we'll run test and give it a shot and see how our test cases run. So I'm just going to go ahead and clean any build that was left behind, and it's compiling our code. And now you should see it compiling our test cases, and now it's actually executing the service build test case. And one of the things it should do, what you'll see is the embedded EJB container, the setup method's being invoked, and the embedded EJB container is being instantiated right now. And sort of the test case, or the EJB modules that we define, are being deployed. And what's going to happen is it's then going to execute our test code, and we'll see it actually shut down the embedded EJB container. You can see the persistence unit was successfully created, and that the PU was done. And now the full runtime's going. Now you can see it sort of coming down as well, and deploying the EJB container once again for each test case, right? So it's bringing up the container, the embedded EJB container, shutting it down, and reinstantiating the persistence unit. And you can see that the tests were run twice. Okay. Now it took us a whole minute, but I'm pretty CPU bound as I'm running the web conference as well. So anyway, just to give you a sense, you can speed this up for a variety of ways. You know, pre-warming the embedded EJB container. But this goes to show you one of the powers of Java E6. This is a standards-based way of testing EJBs. And then again, I mean, and JPA classes. And really, there's nothing special. If you go look at my source code for my service bill, I really only have 2 classes. I mean, you can't get more simple than that. I have a simple entity which maps my domain model, and then a repository or persistent service, depending on the flavor you like to use. And this basically contains all my CRUD operations. I didn't do any reads here, but I easily could have. So this is how you can like quickly build and test both business logic as well as persistence logic as part of E6. And I can run this, of course, all within Netbeans as well. Okay. Excellent case, actually, right inside of Netbeans. So I'm going to go to my test packages. I'm going to right-click, and I'm going to just basically say, test file. Now what's going to happen is, now Netbeans is basically going to run my test harness directly inside of the environment. So this is an example of providing team-based development, either folks who want to work directly within the IDE, or folks who want to run through the command line, either through Hudson jobs where you're running your Maven builds in the background. But what's really nice about this model and the tooling is that effectively you get both a repeatable command line environment in addition to productivity directly within the IDE. So this is really nice complement of features that you get with GlassFish and Netbeans running together. And I think I can sort of show you all the tests that come in. Okay, so you can rerun this source as well. Okay, pretty neat stuff, I think, anyway. You can see which tests have actually passed as well. Okay, let's go ahead and shut this down. And let's go and talk about a new feature, another feature rather, where we're going to actually run the GlassFish server inside of the Maven runtime environment. So first, let's go take a look at our existing Pom file inside of our web project here. And so I'm going to go into the Pom here, and what you'll see is what looks like to be a fairly standard Pom. Now I'm going to go down to the plugin section here, and what we're going to do is we're going to use the Julia Childs approach again, and I'm basically going to go in and copy the web Pom here and paste this in, and I'll talk you through what I'm about to do here, or what these entries do. Now here you'll see that I've configured the Maven embedded GlassFish plugin to deploy my application to the project build directory using project build final as the final name as the actual app itself, and that's going to use the embedded or sort of the compiled output directory. Then I'm going to set the context path in the port to 888. Okay, so let's go ahead and save this, and then I'm going to go back to the command line here, and I'm actually going to go ahead and do a clean and a Maven install here. And what this is going to do is it's going to clean my web project and do a dependency resolution, and basically what you'll see is it's actually going to bring up the GlassFish runtime inside of the Maven runtime. Okay, so this is pretty cool. It's going to basically deploy my application, all my persistence units associated with it, because I do have a dependency on those. And you'll see that the context path / bill is actually up and running. So what I'm going to do is launch my Eclipse, and let's go back over here and go to my bill index.jsp, and type in index.jsp. And what you should see there is hello world. And sure enough, if you go into my web pages, I have a index.jsp, and I have a hello world in there as well. Okay. Now what's really cool is I can now make a changed hello world, go back to this, hit enter, and it's going to undeploy and actually redeploy the application. I'm going to go back here, and voila, the app's actually changed. So you can do iterative JSP development using this model as well. So I'm going to go ahead and Control C that and shut that down. Now let's actually add a Java servlet here and do another rebuild. And one of the things I'm going to do is just show you some other incremental features that we have as well. So I'm going to create a new servlet. Call this billing servlet. I'm not going to add anything, so I'm going to use the Java E6 annotations instead. Go back to my Julia Childs approach here, and one of the things, let's see if I can find the source file here. I'm going to just go ahead and open a servlet, copy and paste everything from the servlet, and I'm going to move it into my source file here, and just save it, and then we'll walk through it. Now you'll see that I have a new billing servlet. It's going to extend HTTP servlet. I'm going to go ahead and in this method, if I have a parameter called add, I'm going to go ahead and add a bill, and if not, I'm going to remove a bill. And this is just basically to generate some JPA activity on the back end. And we're going to make some changes there when we make some JPA activity. Okay, so now what I'm going to do here is basically go back to this file, to my Pom, and make sure I have all my dependencies. And sure enough, I have my Java 6, Java Web API. Okay, great. So now let's actually go up one directory here. I'm going to rebuild because now that I have my old dependencies there. And I'm going to run nbn. This time I'm going to do, because I'm running it from the side, I'm going to say skip tests. I'm doing it from the top level, so I'm going to go ahead and skip my tests here, and I'm going to say clean install. Oh, and I'm also going to need to run embedded GlassFish as well. Wait for this sucker to go. My target class, there we go. And it's going to go ahead and boot up. You can see the JPA build tracker PU persistence unit, and that's because it's pulling in the dependency. And looks like we're almost there. Okay, the application's installed. Now let's go back to the web browser here, and we're going to run the billing servlet this time. I'm going to go ahead and hit the add button, and the bill was added. And let's go ahead and remove it just to show that we can remove it. There we go. Bill was removed. Cool. Okay, so now we've generated some database activity. Now let's come back here. Actually, we'll switch back to this guy. Let's go ahead and exit out and make some changes to our runtime as well. So this time, let's go into back to our EJB and look at the actual persistence unit that we created. Now, if you recall, one of the things we did was we had a persistence unit and we don't have any data source defined. So there's no data source defined. Now what I'd like to be able to do is actually take a module level data source and create a GlassFish resources data source as part of the meta deployment file of this module here. So now what we're going to do is we're going to create a new XML file directly from this. We're going to call it GlassFish resources. Okay. And that's going to create a new XML file. Excuse me. And we're going to go ahead and create that. And I'm going to use my Julia. So again, using the Julia childs-based approach again, what I'm going to do is create a new GlassFish resources XML file. And from this XML file, what it's going to allow us to do is basically create resources within the application and scope those resources so that they're only visible within that application. So we're going to take the same resource, we're going to package it as part of our application bundle inside of here, and then what we're going to see is basically our ability to create resources within the application deployment unit for the purposes of binding and creating a self-contained application deployment unit. So instead of using the Maven-based approach, let's actually go ahead and create the resource file here. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the Services tab, slide over here, and I'm actually going to start show you one of the GlassFish Server capabilities of creating a new server. And this time I'm going to actually add a GlassFish Server here. And I'm going to point to my directory structure. I'll just go ahead and browse to my products directory here. And you'll see that I have GlassFish Server v3.1. Choose, and I'm going to go ahead and select that I have it. Click Next. And I'm going to use the local domain there called domain1. And I'm going to rely on the default ports for domain1, which will be 4848. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and hit Finish. And now I have a new server called GlassFish 3.1. I'm going to delete this old ones just so I don't get confused. And I'm going to go ahead and start this guy in debug mode. Or I can run it in profile mode as well, but I'm going to just go ahead and start it from within here. And I'm going to switch over to the GlassFish Server tab. I'll show you how we're going to actually go about deploying the application directly using the console. But first thing, what I'd like to do is switch over here. I'm going to rebuild my MVN file with my new resource by running mvn clean install, and I'll wait while my GlassFish server comes up. Now I'm not going to deploy the binary. I'm going to sort of switch back here, wait for this thing to finish. Let's see, is my GlassFish server is completely up and running? Almost. It's still actually building. And when this comes up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the deployment to the actual war-based deployment, so that I can actually use that in the console. So let me switch back. I'm going to go fire up the console here by going to Safari. We don't want to load that up. 4848. Console is going to go ahead and bootstrap while this guy's coming up, because we loaded this inside of the Maven repo. I didn't unchange. I'm going to go ahead and hit exit, and you'll see my deployment's going to finish there. Okay. The login's executing now. Now I'm going to go to the applications. I'm going to deploy my application here. This time I'm going to use the war file. Now from the applications tab you can choose war, and we're going to go ahead and deploy that unit now. I'm going to switch back to my console. Now you can see all the output coming directly into Netbeans as well. Okay, I'm going to switch back to the console. Let's go ahead and launch the application and go ahead and click on index.jsp and also run our servlet, billing servlet !, add equals true. Yeah. Now a couple other features I wanted to show folks. One, under the server config, you'll see this is where I've deployed. Since I deployed my application to the domain admin server, this is effectively where I can control all the settings for logging, for example. So if I want to control the verbosity of the output for the log levels, or if I want to change the file log rotation limits, I can do that all within the console as well. So here I can change the size in bytes. I can change the amount of time that I want the file rotation to be based on minutes, and we can rotate that every minute. Hit save, and I'll get a new log rotation every minute. Okay, and I'll save that as well. Okay, now one area where you really common for folks to change is the log levels themselves. And this is how you turn up the verbosity of the actual subsystem that you're looking at troubleshooting. So let's set the persistence this time to finest. Go ahead and save that. Okay, now let's switch back to our browser here. Whoops, did I run it in another one? I did. Let's go ahead and create a new tab. And we're going to do localhost 8080 bill. Oops, did I miss it? And what you see is you'll see some output for the log levels change, but oh well, I guess I should actually use our tool. So let's go back to the application deployments, and I'll just go through the billing servlet so that you can actually see the launch here. Billing added, there it was. It's back here. I'm going to go ahead and refresh. We'll hit back to the column here. Oh, let's see if we get any new output. Okay. Looks like we don't get any additional verbosity out of the persistence, but anyway, you get the idea. You can change log levels. I think part of that is that the log levels for the Eclipse link. Let's see if there's any org Eclipse link exposed this way. Probably not. But this would be where you would see the individual verbosity of a given subsystem show up in here. Maybe another better example here would be how about our EJB container? We should see some stuff coming in there. So I'll go ahead and set this to finest. Let's go ahead and save that and then switch back to our console here and see if we get any additional output. Okay, refresh. Oops. And sure enough, you'll see some additional output coming in directly from the EJB logging verbosity being cranked up. Okay. Anyway, that's just a quick introduction to some of the new features with the console, as well as some of the IDE integration that we've added in 3.1. We covered application scoped resources and testing EJBs using the embedded container, as well as running your projects through Maven. So anyway, I want to thank you folks for attending, and we'll be accepting questions now. All right, talk to you soon.